such a rowdy crowd here. Super rowdy crowd. I'm super happy to be here. Thank you all for coming. I see lots and lots of familiar faces, but a few people I don't know, so I'm going to pretend that I'm talking to them, introduce myself. I'm going to address a couple of the questions that I generally get asked before, I don't know, when people just ask me like the obvious questions. I'll answer my own obvious questions. The first is, why did I write this book 20 years after the fact? And so the background is that I was in therapy when I was 24, and that's 20 years ago, if actually now a little more, because this book took about 4 years to edit, but we'll overlook that. So about 4 years ago, I ended up feeling really depressed and feeling like I didn't quite know what to do with myself. I had been writing cookbooks for the last 10 years and raising my family and being married, and I just felt really lost. And I was living in New Jersey, and I didn't have a lot of options in terms of what to do with that. I'd never been back in therapy since I left therapy when I was 26 and moved to New York to go to grad school. So I had to write my way out of that, and that was what I decided to do. It was sort of an act of desperation in a certain sense, not to sound too dramatic, but so I wrote this book in kind of a white heat. I just ripped out a big draft. My husband thought I was having an affair because I was at a coffee shop all the time, and he just was so pissed at me, and I wouldn't look at my phone, and I wouldn't pick up my kids, and I wouldn't do anything. So that's kind of why that's why it took me 20 years. I never planned to write this book. I never thought, oh, I'm gonna write about this time in my life that was difficult. And in fact, I sort of put it behind me when I got married and moved to New York. It's like it didn't exist. It was like a little bubble back there that I could sort of walk away from, pretty much. So writing this book was a very private action, really, initially. I didn't think, oh, I'm writing this memoir and I'm gonna go publish it. But it kind of dovetailed with another part of the reason why I was feeling so depressed at the time was that I felt like I had no career. I felt like I had no purpose. I felt like I didn't have any sort of self-respect. And that is because I felt like I was sitting at the kids' table at Thanksgiving. I was writing cookbooks, and I didn't respect the work that I was doing. I'm surrounded by writers of all kinds, and I really wanted to write a real book, which in my head was not a cookbook, as unfair as that may be. So instead of burying this giant file on my computer, I decided to try to turn it into something I could actually be proud of. And that was an important part of probably working through what I was doing and actually going back and looking at this period in my life. One other thing that I'll tell you, I have my psychiatric file from my years in therapy. I was in therapy for 3 years in Vermont. I was living in Burlington. And my psychiatrist handed me my file when I left. Really took me by surprise. It was our last session. He said, do you want a copy of this? And I said, are you sure you have time to make a copy? Like, I thought it was strange, and I didn't want to inconvenience him, but I said, sure. So when I left that session, he handed me a full copy of my record. And it's pretty unusual, if anyone's familiar with this, to have your own the notes from your therapy. And I didn't touch it for 20 years. It was kind of radioactive material in my attic. But when I hit this moment, when I needed to write about this period, part of dealing with that was jumping back into that, or for the first time, actually, looking at that file. So this book is actually grounded in a lot of material from my file. So I think that helped me keep it grounded in the reality of back then. It's a long time ago. Memory is incredibly fallible, and I think I'm very grateful that I had that file, and I sort of think of it as a gift that he gave me when I left that I didn't realize was a gift at the time. So I'm going to read first. There's 3 sections in my book, and I'm going to read a little bit from each one, which I promise I won't sit here and drone on all day. The first one takes place when I'm actually leaving, the night before I go, and then the actually morning of I leave for the psychiatric hospital. So I've been in therapy for about a year and, I'm trying to remember, year and a half about. And I've been self-destructing. And I've made sort of a contract with my psychiatrist that if I continue to burn my arm with cigarettes, which is my choice self-destructive sort of behavior at the time, I would go to a psychiatric hospital because he'd been very patient with me, and I think he reached a point where he felt like he couldn't really stand by and have this just go on and on and on. So his responsibility, I think, was to sort of, make an agreement and I agreed to that. So when I sort of slipped, and this is from the perspective of sitting in my apartment waiting for my appointment the next day, and my father was to arrive and come escort me down to Baltimore. So I wish, instead of going to my 8 a.m. appointment at Dr. Kohl's office, where I'll meet my father and pick up whatever information he needs to get me where I'm going, I could go now, passing like a wraith through the brick walls in the pre-dawn gloom. I'd sit silently in the darkness of the politely tasteful reception area, waiting for Dr. Kohl. I'm safe there. Eventually, he'd unlock the outer door, check the answering machine, unlock his office, and disappear into his space. He wouldn't indicate he'd seen me, but he'd know, we would know, he'd seen me there. Hell, instead of going to Baltimore, I could occupy that same chair there all day, unobtrusively observing as he came and went, collecting and discharging patients. I could pretend, as I always do when I spot one of his patients, either waiting for the next appointment or leaving the one before me, that those other people don't exist. Fakes, liars, nothing to him. Quiet as I would be, virtually invisible, he would care only for me. Sadly, I do have an 8 a.m. appointment to keep. There will be no sitting in the waiting room all day. Long has that first appointment of the day been mine, Mondays and Thursdays. First, one more time, best. In my mind lurks the suggestion that if I'm being hospitalized, I must be exceptional, although maybe not in the way I'd like. For a year and some, that feels like the entirety of my fucking life, I've been waiting to feel the charged moment when the door opens and he looks at me, taking me in, deliciously assessing, deciding about me as I step through the public doorframe into privacy, drop my bag by the chair, and turn to face him. Once in the chair, I'm excited as a blooming girl set before her birthday cake, with bow-tied gifts piled around, awaiting eager hands. 6 months ago, he noted as much to himself. Almost every time she sits down here, she looks like a contented child, settling in to be doted upon. Now, for the first time, I don't want time to pass. I just want to sit here in the safety of my apartment. Why can't time move now as it did for the past year, the hours between appointments stumbling, slow as redemption in a 1950s Western you're watching because you might as well fuck that 2.5 hours into oblivion with an overfilled bowl of salty, cheesy popcorn, as not. Like a lizard, I take pop kernels hand to mouth, lifting them as they stick to the wet of my protruding tongue, carefully measured time dripping, one by one, minutes, slow as the progression of 9-point type, marching in tight, mean lines down the longest, most boring book. Title page, dedication, table of contents, introduction, preface, chapters, notes, glossary, appendix, index, addendum, margins half an inch all around. For so long, I urged the days until Monday away, and then cursed Tuesday and Wednesday as if their only purpose was blocking passage until Thursday rolled in. As it always does, however far my faith slips, the hour eventually comes. At least I can trust that. And now, here it is, September 10th. The ritual. First, Henry's Diner, where I'm useless, acting like a fool without a book at midnight and a delayed flight 12 hours out. Before I have time to put myself in order over coffee and toast, the ugly 8 a.m. is nearly upon me. time to walk around the block to hit his office, where I'm supposed to see myself off to an unknown that, once done, can't be undone. I've been caught in his self-made snare. So effective, escape requires self-annihilation. I won't say goodbye. His car is there, hot and slick as always. I make my way past the reception desk and the empty chairs. A fresh benefaction. But not this time. I've just arrived and we're nearly done. There are 3 of us. It's all business with my father there. Unforgivably steady, the clock's tick-free modesty can't be blamed this time, or ever. But I do blame it. However politely, it has silently betrayed me by signaling me out the door twice a week, sometimes more often. Who made the rule that 55 minutes is enough? I'll blame the whipping boy, Freud. But for now, it's the clock that keeps his terms. I wonder if I could shatter it with a toss, small and large gold-plated hands, heart points flying. Would it grace the air, detached, spraying seconds in droplets as it fell to the floor? If that didn't work, I could go inside, where it keeps its purpose behind a churning mechanical hum, to bend and break the pieces. Or I could simply smash it down on the shiny table to stop it. But what if the masterful electricity, arguably the true culprit, clip, cut, pull the plug? However it's done, I'd like to dismantle the whole with the violence it's due, at least temporarily eliminating the mechanism of my departure. But the send-off is in motion. Dr. Kohl's hand extends to offer his grasp. A shake? What can he mean? Shake hands as if we've completed a deal? Met politely at a conference and hope to see each other again, knowing we won't shake? Thanks for dinner, and I'm sorry I'm fucking your wife shake? You're a little shit and I'll crush you, but people are watching, so I'll follow convention shake? Surely it's the goodbye and we have a deal shake. I'm numb. I've never shaken his hand. I've hardly ever touched him, except for those riveting moments when he wheeled his analyst chair close to me to examine, clean, and bandage my burned arm. That was touch. But this? Out of years of polite training, politesse, my dad would prompt at the least impudent glimmer. I extend my hand, skin to skin. His unblemished, callus-free office fingers graze the freshly laid Band-Aid covering last night's handiwork on my palm. He's close enough to see my cheek. I'd chosen the most obvious, most visible spot. Fuck you. It didn't matter anymore. The game was up. More fresh work there, more fresh work on my feet. How can Dr. Kohl let go, sending me off with nothing more than this stale ritual of a formal goodbye? Willing time to release the warp speed it takes on in this room, I won't yield. I'm walking out that door I've walked out of so many times with the greatest regret for a 2 or 3 day absence. Now this? Weeks, months, years, forever? He releases my hand as I petition the moment to show some sign of promise. Anything, really, will do. So, let's see. Now I'm gonna skip, that was the end of part 1. So I'm gonna skip into part 2. It's pretty early in part 2, and it's shorter. These other 2 are shorter. And I've just been left at the hospital by my dad. He flew me down to Baltimore. He drove me to Shepherd Pratt the next day, which is the psychiatric hospital. And, signed myself in, did all the paperwork, and then he left. So this is just the very beginning of that. Where am I going? The paperwork is fully inked. Now they have to actually do something with me. I can't stop thinking about which ward they will put me in. They must have halls for those prone to violence. That's where they station the beefiest nurses and an extra hall monitor or 2. There must be a children's ward, a sad hall to hold fragile minds that have disappeared from this world to another. Surely there's a place for pure crazy. I hope I'm not going there. I'm depressed, bulimic, and self-destructive. I have no history of violence or psychosis, unless you count what I do to myself. What about a ward for people who have just grown too tired to perform? I dream of death, but have never tried to die. Perhaps there's a politely crazy hall that separates the sad and hopeless from the insane. That's where I'd like to go, where inmates share a semblance of normality and where civilized behavior remains in effect, a place to exit the world without making it final. A sensory deprivation tank set 1 degree above body temperature, 99.9. Silent as snow, dark as bat velvet. Released from intake, I'm flanked by 2 nurses, 1 on each side. I follow in step with them down a fortress-worthy corridor into the nucleus of the building. My talismanic pink Converse high tops convey my docile body down the hall. The nurses aren't talking or touching me, but I'm pretty sure they would yell or grab at me if I tried to step out of line. I walk while holding on to the objective idea of the action. In seconds, I'll glimpse my fate, and once I do, I've agreed to tolerate it for at least 72 hours, probably longer. My jailers get to do with me whatever they like, and I have no reason, beyond Dr. Kohl's recommendation, to trust this place. I might really be in for it. I should have left, extracted the maximum cash advance from my Amex, and made a spectacular disappearance. India, Thailand, Brazil. In their matching white uniforms, the nurses resemble a pair of trained white mice, their hyper-attentive eyes searching and alert, as if a cat's around the next corner. Or do I have it all wrong, and I am the cat? We pass identical doors punctured by windows set at eye level, so a nurse, orderly, doctor, food service worker, or janitor can peer in to see if anyone is waiting on the other side. In here, there are no good surprises. This peeking routine must be part of the workers' safety training, and I'm sure it's effective in preventing assaults and escapes. The brutality here is well disguised. The contrast of the fine crisscross of metal filaments over the windows against the backdrop of the hall's grandeur signals an awkward evolution of the space's use. Is there an impermeable door with unbreakable glass for me, or are they taking me somewhere else? I can't quite grasp I'm about to be locked up, much less what that will feel like. It strikes me that this is a good time to make a scene, no matter how minor, before I'm locked in. But I'm not that kind of girl, as has been proved. There's a quiet magic in control. I need to play nice, and there's nothing I can do about it. Not yet. I've taken this further than I intended, if I did intend anything. Therapy, burning. It's as if I started laughing in a silent room when I was supposed to be quiet. The attempt to stifle the noise and gain control only fueled the laughter, but there's no stopping because I enjoy letting it take over more than I've enjoyed anything for a long time. It had been glorious fun until I realized I couldn't stop if I tried. So I'm going to skip over all the juicy bits in my hospital chapter. Let's see. I stayed in the hospital for 2 months, almost exactly. And so I'm just kind of bookend this by reading from the section where I'm about to see my psychiatrist again for the first time. And just so you know, Henry's is the little cafe in Burlington that actually my kids just noticed and went to by happenstance, where I used to go and prep for my session. So I'd go sit there every morning and sit for a whole hour and order the very same thing. I'd order cinnamon toast and coffee and smoke my cigarettes till the whole place was probably cloudy with it, back in the days when you could sit and drink coffee in a cafe and smoke cigarettes. So I used to go there all the time. It was my very rigid ritual, and then I would walk around the corner to my psychiatrist. So, Henry's, I've arrived. I crunch spiced sugar on warm bread, anxiety mixing with smoke and sour coffee. The waitresses in matching maroon take a few orders, mostly at the counter, talking among themselves. It's early and the day is long. They don't seem to register they haven't seen me in 2 months, despite the sign on my forehead. Freak. Or does the sign read psycho? Psycho freak? Or maybe it just says loser and I'm flattering myself. There's no chance of reading the newspaper. It's just for cover. I stare at bitten cuticles, scars, and gold rings I'm again wearing. They're welcome links to places and people. I smoke another, knowing there's a cigarette machine in the corner, right over there. Freedom. I feel people looking at me. I'm now one of those people who frequent public places everywhere, buses, bars, park benches, who make other people nervous. My force field of isolation keeps me safe. You'd never casually ask one of these people over the back of the booth for the ketchup, or offer to buy a drink in a bar, or sit next to one on a bus unless the one seat adjacent to them was the last one open. I'd long suspected many of these people weren't as scary as they appeared. And now that I've entered their ranks, I know it's true. My natural fluid movement between inside and outside remains stiff. I can't locate my public face as easily as I once could. Or maybe I don't care enough to make the effort. Do I feel ashamed? Yes, though I'll pretend not to be when I see my friend Jess and my ex-boyfriend Matt. The worst will be the well-meaning acquaintances, busy talking around, knowing where I went, when we both know they know. I'm almost sympathetic. What can they say? How was it? Happy to be back? You look great. I can smile and pretend it was nothing, move the topic along, turn it around with, I'm fine, how are you? Mercifully, it has to be gotten through but once. Pretending I never went anywhere is the easy way out, for them and for me. The shortest waitress tips the brown and gold urn to fill my too small cup. She's making her rounds. I sit as long as I can at my table, forcing one more cigarette down. When I go, I want Dr. Kohl to be there before me, waiting. The locked exterior door to the building reminds me that his room is a place of business where we engage in a professional transaction. I want to open the door to see him bending over the receptionist's desk, looking at some paper, that luxurious, thoroughly reliable warmth ready and waiting for me. I long for his encompassing smile, the one he never fails to offer, the one that comes freely, flooding me with his sympathy, admiration, affection, and interest. The contents of my stomach jump and squirm, the movement coming right up to my throat. I'm choking on the anticipation of seeing him again. I slide out of the booth, money on the table, ashtray full, coffee gone, granules of sugar and crumbs, all that remain of my toast. I'm not sure whether I'm walking or floating over the blocks to 112 Church Street. Door unlocked, inside in his presence, his eyes on me. I feel the sickness fall away as he unfolds himself, predictable and lusher than I remember. That smile and the eyes hold me. Once we are secure behind his closed door, it's us, bodies, but mostly words. I could swallow them, but they keep longer this way, out there in the room, in the air between us. This is what I waited for. This is what I mean. I tell him about how I mostly wanted to leave the hospital and how afraid I was of catching the dreaded defeat that had drowned so many of the patients there. I tell him I felt guarded with Dr. Weiss, careful of what I said. I liked a few of the night staff, the ones who saw me in the dark hall, who knew I hardly slept during their shift. I tell him I'm afraid of getting sent back if I lose it. And then there's silence because I'm not telling him anything. I've been talking fast, but not saying much. Silence. Are you waiting for me to start talking? He says, because I'm over here trying to figure out where you are. That's when I know I'm home. The fantasy of reunion runs its strange, unexpected course. I was detached, but hadn't realized it until he asked me where I was. The pleasure of him knowing me is deep and terrifying. Now I'm here again, about to become his, in a way I can't begin to imagine. There's business to do, unavoidable. He's taking my treatment in hand, setting limits, and insisting on accountability. He writes re-entry at the top of the chart, as if I'm returning to Earth's atmosphere, from space. That's it. So, questions. I'd love to answer some questions if you guys have them. Oh, and a mic, no less. I'm not sure we need it, but nobody knows, everyone knows everything about this book and me. That's awesome.
This is kind of a process question.
Okay.
How much of this came back to you as you were writing it? Were there a lot of sort of submerged or half-remembered memories, or?
Yeah, there were. But I think, Josh, they would have been a lot different if I hadn't had the file. That there were a lot of things I didn't remember or that I'd misremembered about my treatment over those 3 years. And reading it was often really surprising. And I think that it's almost like I was talking about this the other day, the trick of writing a book like this in 20 years later and also writing in the present tense. So it's a bit of a tricky sleight of hand in terms of the narrative. And I think that it's not as if I could write the book from the perspective of who I was then. I had to layer in everything I learned reading my file, thinking back, thinking about who I am now, how I view that now, and where I am in my life right now. So I don't want to say that it's not the person. In other words, I try to keep true to the voice of what was here, and I actually keep pretty tight to the notes. But I think that some of the insights, like it's all there, but I think the insights came later. So I don't think I could quite put it all together at the time. So it's like I pieced it together for the book in a way. So, anyone else?
Do you ever crave to burn yourself again? I mean, you're a smoker, so it's always.
Yeah, I'm a smoker. I'm going to say, Sammy, that it's a thing that sort of attracts, and I think it's one of those perverse pleasures that is really hard to explain, because pretty much anyone else you ask is going to think that that's really not a pleasurable thing to do. So I'm not going to say that it's just evaporated, because I never ever quite reached the point where I thought, that's insane. I mean, I can do that intellectually, but I can't really, I don't know, I just never, I always intellectualize it. I think, well, people do all kinds of shit to their body, right? Well, among other things, they drink themselves to death and do too many drugs and those kind of self-destructive things. But they also tattoo themselves and pierce themselves. And there's tons of traditions of, in other cultures of scarring oneself, to belong to a tribe or to identify one's status or all these kind of things. So I get a little sort of multicultural about it if I want to justify it. So, Liz?
Dr. Kohl has passed away, right?
Right.
Do you think you could have or would have written this book if he were still living? Because your relationship with him, did he ever know that you were doing this, or he died before?
No. So, it's weird because I wrote this book in many ways to get back to him. So I wanted to connect to him again, and I was too afraid to call or try to contact him, because the last time I'd spoken to him, and I kept in touch with him for about 10 years after I left treatment, the last time I'd spoken to him, he was fairly seriously ill. But, these things can improve. So I actually didn't know if he was living or not. I kind of felt like I needed him when I was writing this book. And so it started kind of as like a thank you to him. And I think I would have been happy to have him read it, actually, which feels really strange because he's dead, so he never knew I was writing this book or any of that. So It would be really strange for certain, but I guess if I could go have a couple sessions, that would be fine. Yeah. Anyone else? There was a question back there.
Have you had contact with any of the people that you were at the sanitarium or whatever you're calling
I
it?
like that. Sanitarium, very, very Magic Mountain-y. I should have called it that
Shepherd,
in the book.
right.
Yes, the Shepherd Sanitarium. I have not. And, you know, I made one, and this isn't in the book, I made one kind of friend there. Actually, I do mention him, but I don't really go into it. And I had a little bit of contact with him after I left, but the kind of 101 rule of this kind of thing is if you're in rehab or in a psychiatric hospital, you might want to just leave those relationships behind you. So I was kind of encouraged to do that. And as it turned out, I think that was a good choice because it seemed a little, he was a little psychotic. So that's not always really good when he's in and out of the hospital. So the answer is no, none of them. So, yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, James.
Just curious, you said you wrote it in a kind of white heat,
Yeah.
at least like the first version of it. What did you come to see that you hadn't seen before in this writing process? Was there anything new about that whole experience that you hadn't really come to see or understand?
Well, I think there's a lot that I didn't realize until I dug into this. And especially over 20 years. And I, you know, like I said before, I kind of put this period of my life in a bubble. And I got married, I went to grad school, I raised kids, I had a family. I kind of like isolated those years in a really careful way. So going back was a real rediscovery. And it's almost like I had to really brush off all that dust from my memory and revisit it strangely from the perspective of the person I had turned into. So I think one of the things that I acknowledged most of all was just how in love with him I was. It is pretty obvious, I think, to other people, and it's pretty obvious if you read the file, I think. But it was a really scary thing to acknowledge that. It's obviously rather forbidden, and he was very much a father figure to me as well, so it was really complicated. So I think that's one of the main things that kind of came out with writing this book. Right, yeah.
Tell you how beautiful you are, but I'm just wondering, how scary was it? I don't know if anybody asked, I had to go get water, but to dip in, like really dive in, and write this kind of a memoir.
Well, you always go right to the core, don't you, Rhea? It was really scary. And when you're diving back into something like this, you know, you get caught up in it. It felt like it was happening all over again to me. I think that's partly why I wrote it the way I did, really quickly, and I was very intensely in the experience, like being a method actor but a writer. I fortunately had a really good psychiatrist by then who has helped me through this whole process. And I don't think I could have written this book without that, because she gave me perspective on the work I was doing. And in some strange ways, yeah, there's a lot of her in here as well, layered onto Dr. Kohl, because that's inevitable. You know, the wisdom, or I hate to say wisdom, because I'm, you know, the insights that I gained in the process of writing the book were also part of the process of being in therapy I've been in therapy now since I started writing this book, basically in 2012. So it's been a while. So yeah, it was fucking terrifying. Anyone else? Yeah, Vito.
Were you nervous to have your children read this book?
Yes, well, at first, they both said that they didn't want to read it, which was a huge relief to me. I'm like, great. It's like, you know, if you're an actress and you've got like this gnarly sex scene in a movie and you're like, no kids, it's rated R, wait till it's like, you know, you're over 21. My kids are teenagers, they're right here, so it's kind of up to them, but I was really happy they didn't want to read it initially, but I feel like they're sort of edging toward reading it now, which is kind of like, guys, are you sure you want to do that? Because you're not going to, like, there's all kinds of stuff in there you're not going to want to know about your nice mother. But maybe they don't think I'm so nice anyway, so it's fine. Anyone else?
What do you think you'll do next?
Thanks, Melissa. Well, what I should be doing is probably working on another book, and I haven't been able to do that. I just haven't gotten off my ass. I have to say, the process of working on this book, it's, you know, I started writing it in the spring of 2012, so I had a big draft then. And then, you know, it took some time. I had people read it who believed in me, and then I found the right agent for it, and then I found the right publisher. And by that time, I was really lucky because I landed at Grove, which had turned the process of getting this book into print into a whole different thing. So in my mind, I thought, okay, well, I've written this whole book and they just bought it, so let's go. We're gonna go to press, you know? That wasn't how it should have gone, and that's not how it went. I had an amazing editor in Elizabeth Schmitz, and she just worked with me on this book, and also Katie, who is here, through many, many drafts. And I benefited so hugely from that process. I would have put a baggier, kind of confused, difficult to follow book out on the market if they hadn't worked with me to turn this into a much more legible story. And I think a friend of mine here has quoted to me that there's the book you need to write, and then there's the book you need to publish, and they're not always the same thing. So I was lucky enough to find the right people to help me publish the right book, or some version of the right book, what I think is the right book. So, yeah. I didn't answer your question, did I? That was a nice segue. Yeah, I don't really know. I don't want to write any more food books. I'm really, I'm so glad I'm not doing that anymore. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But yeah, I have some little projects. I've been sitting on a couple little projects. There's this silly little project about the Meyer lemon that I've been sitting on for 10 years that sort of interests me now and again. I could write a sequel to this book, but it might be a little early. I don't know. So we'll see. Thank you all for coming.